Coogs house. The Big 12 was starting to look a little extra chaotic after some big basketball games around the conference on Tuesday night. But the most chaos may be coming from the other Cougars of the conference.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, a podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Here to break down all things Cougs, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if you're a skier or a snowboarder or just not a snow mountains person in general. Today's show is brought to you by Wayfair. More on that later, but that's a lot of fun to talk about in the future because right now we got chaos happening in the Big 12. I want to talk about what's happening in the basketball court and how Houston's benefiting from that, how Houston might benefit from it even more by the end of the weekend. That's the latter two-thirds of the show, but I want to start first with what's happening in Provo, Utah at BYU, where rather large changes are taking place that are going to have ripple effects that hit the rest of the conference, right? At BYU, if you did not hear on Tuesday afternoon, Tom Holmoe, the AD, has been there a little over 20 years at this point, like that. He is stepping down at the end of the athletic year, which is when all their athletic seasons are done. So if they have a big, college baseball World Series run or whatever, softball World Series run, they'll, I guess, theoretically go through June. But whenever the seasons are done in the spring, that is when Holmoe will step down. That means they're looking for a new AD and a new AD fast. This is a relatively quick search. And I want to stress how dramatically this could shift the Big 12 landscape and impact Houston. BYU, in a lot of ways, feels similar to Houston, that they're both sleeping giants in the world of college athletics. And Houston, that sleeping giant term comes from the athletes in the area, the local geography. Very little. Houston's a hotbed for athletics, interest for money in athletics from people around you. All of the great high school athletes in the area, turning them into college athletes and so on. Coaches want to come coach and recruit those areas. You'd hope you get business. They want to partner those programs and so on. That's the sleeping giant that is Houston. That's local geography. The sleeping giant that is BYU is the international geography. The Church of Latter-day Saints is a big deal, to say the least, and that it's got a gigantic reach across the globe. That means that there's a lot of dollars out there across the world that all see BYU as the best representation of at least themselves, if not the world, in college athletics. That has not really been tapped yet because we're still in the first, half decade of the NIL era, and all of the ways that money can translate into very literal success. Meanwhile, as early as we are in that era, BYU did pretty darn well in the Big 12 in their second year in the conference last year in football, and then knocked the socks off of Colorado in their bowl game. And look, I don't mean to toot their horning, but I think Big 12 schools need to understand that this shakeup is going to reverberate into all of our schools, depending on where they go with this, right? There's a chance BYU turns themselves, with all of the financial backing and resources they've got, into someone that we all have to compare ourselves to and measure ourselves up against, right? That's a dramatic shift in what it has been the last 2 years. Houston's been in the conference, and then obviously before that, when BYU was not in this conference. To Holmoe's credit, the AD that's stepping down up there, he navigated all this. See, they had their own TV channel for a while. They were briefly independent. They, navigated all the things and got into a Power 4 conference, and they got into it before. Instead of, they could have easily joined the Pac-12 with nearby University of Utah, and instead that conference falls apart when they enter the Big 12. They navigate that they could have gotten stuck like Oregon State. Like that could have easily happened to them, and it did not. So credit to Homo for that. I am very happy with, for whatever you think about Pesman's pros and cons and all that. He got Houston in the Big 12. That's a big deal, right? Now, with all the growth BYU's had over the last 20 years, the next 20, with all the money that is coming into college athletics, is going to be bigger. The question is just how big, and is it the kind of big that a school like a Houston can reasonably compete with, right? Um, Again, the LDS Church has money coming in from all over the world, not unlike how Notre Dame has Catholic money from all over the world or anything like that. Like, they have these international reaches, right, of people that are fans of the school for reasons beyond sports, right? Doesn't have to be alumni at that point. For instance, you got the whole LDS Church. That includes like the Marriott family. I mean, like multiple branches off of that Marriott family would be big time, or have been big time donors in the past. And frankly, when you talk about like those big time donors making a difference, AJ DeBansa, the top ranked prospect in class 2025 high school basketball, it has committed there. And it was, the whole deal was that he committed to BYU for an NIL package that was rumored to be anywhere between $7.5 and $10 million. There will be a lot of people drafted in the NBA draft this summer that do not see that kind of money per year, right? That's a big deal. And that's the tip of the iceberg potentially, right? So whatever angle they go here is really going to be a big deal. They could go with something more, you know, keeping the train on the tracks and get the current associate AD or the assistant AD or whatever the role is officially for him. I think it's Chad Lewis. Liz Darger is the woman in charge, and she's got like the top female ranking gig at the university. And frankly, it's done a lot of great things there, and would be a signal of change for them in a lot of ways too. That's a big moment you go with them. You go get like other ADs. The Columbia AD, Peter Pilling, is a BYU alum. Mark Hill, the deputy AD, the second in command at University of Kentucky, he's a member of the LDS Church. He would be interested. But you could also go outside of college sports. Scott O'Neill, the Live Golf CEO, is a LDS member, BYU person, BYU fanboy. He could absolutely come and run that thing like a business, and look at what they've done with money at Live Golf. Danny Ainge runs the Utah Jazz. Well, there's been some like hush hush, like what's going on with AJ DeBansa at BYU or whatever, right? Like, he clearly can run a sports organization at a very high level, understands the dollars and cents of it all. He's got ties to the church and BYU as well. So it's really interesting in that anyone tied to LDS, this would be the top athletics job, right? Like, this is higher than the NBA, NFL, higher than front office of a MLB team. Like, being the AD at BYU for a member of that church, that ranks above all else, right? And so that opens the door to a whole other host of candidates. And for Houston and the rest of the Big 12, I think you have to monitor this and continue to follow what they do. They got a short timeline, which actually kind of think works in the rest of the conference's favor, because they kind of want someone there by June 1st, I'd imagine, at the latest, to kind of have some crossover, if not be ready to pick up the job when it's theirs, right? And so that means that, can you get Scott O'Neill off of Live Golf that fast? I don't know. Maybe, right? Can you get a more traditional AD like a Peter Pilling out of Columbia? Probably more realistic. That's better for Houston in the Big 12, because that's, at least something you understand is coming. I will say, though, that this is the kind of thing where, as much growth as BYU had in the last 20 years under Tom Holmoe, you got to be looking at this as the kind of program that you're going to be stacking yourself up against in the next few, because of the upward trajectory, exponential growth of that athletic program. And so I'm not saying that Houston has anything to be worried about. Eddie is the perfect hire for Houston. He's done nothing but good things so far. Things are all working in the right direction. But as we continue to say, we want to compare Houston to the conference's best, I think that could very quickly become BYU in a lot of worlds, and who they hire as the next AD is going to change which one of those worlds we're living in. So I want to make sure that chaos in the conference that kind of goes on behind the scenes is not on the hardwood or on the grass or anything like that. I want to make sure you got an eye on that like I do. That's the kind of thing that I think you can pick up on. Then, like in 5 years when BYU is winning a bunch of titles, it's like, what happened? Oh, that is what happened. Houston, we hope to be beating BYU in those titles. So let's make sure we're keeping an eye on our opponent in that sense. Speaking of opponents, chaos is happening at the top of the Big 12 basketball standings. I'll get to that in a second. But first, today's show is brought to you by Wayfair. And after that holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little bit of TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing helps you get back into a routine. And whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, giving your space a new look, whatever, Wayfair has everything you need all within your budget. Again, teacher and coach. We moved into a new house this fall. Wayfair had everything we need at our price points, whatever we wanted to spend. We also look at what was the next price point if we wanted to stretch ourselves a little bit here or there. Wayfair.com had it all. The best part was the free and hassle-free delivery, even for big items like couches and tables. Wayfair site, super easy to navigate, found everything we needed in no time. Get your home the refresh it needs to the Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's Wayfair, WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Park Ranger locked on Coogs, talking about Houston being atop the Big 12 conference. It's official after Kansas State took down Arizona on Tuesday night. Houston sits atop the Big 12 on their own. Houston sits atop the Big 12 at 12-1 in conference. Kansas State beats Arizona and is now 11. Arizona is now 11-2. Texas Tech close at 9-3. Iowa State close at 9-4. And I will have to say, I feel like the Big 12 champ is going to be around that 3-4 loss area. And I will say that with that 3-4 loss area, that kind of knocks out Kansas is 7-5 or BYU is 7-6 presently, and they already have more losses, I think, than it will be. That being said, I guess you're going to tell me that one of those teams is going to make a run at it from that far back in the standings. I would have to think it's Kansas State, who just beat Arizona, but is also surging. They lost 6 in a row, and now they've won 6 conference games in a row to get to 6-6, 500 in the conference. And they've got a pretty easy February, or at least as easy as the Big 12 can make it. At least in my opinion, I think it's pretty easy relative to the rest of the Big 12. And that means that, frankly, if everyone just to slaughterhouse one another and kind of have the top of the conference fall apart, Kansas State might backdoor their way into something there. They're certainly kind of making a push to get themselves into the good seed of the conference tournament, but then ultimately a decent seed in the NCAA tournament if they can get there. Big deal for that one was, though, that Kansas State beat Arizona in Arizona. Something Houston's looking to do this weekend. Now, regardless of the outcome of that game, Houston at Arizona this weekend was always going to be at least 1 versus 2 after Houston beat Baylor on Monday, right? And so right now you got number 1 in the conference, Houston, coming into play. Number 2 in the conference, Arizona, at their place. Had Arizona won, it would have been 1A versus 1B, right? As far as they both had the same conference record, with Houston having a little bit better non-conference record and giving them the 1A boost. I do look at this though and think, okay, if the winner of this conference is going to have 3 or 4 losses, where are we? And obviously, the goal is to win every game step on the floor on. I don't mean to say I'm okay with losing games or anything like that, but I also even last year, this team was 15-3 in the regular season conference games, and they won the conference by 2 games. I mean, the thought that this team could pull off a 19-1 is just feels ludicrous. They had a pretty tough February, at least a tough stretch in February, to wrap the season. And so I look at Arizona this Saturday and Arizona State on Tuesday, both on the road. While I imagine they stay out in Arizona in between, out in the desert, that is a tough pair of road games to go back-to-back 2 road games, true road games, long way from home road games in 4 days, right? That that's the kind of thing where you could lose to the second game, whoever it was, just on exhaustion, right? Never mind that you're playing Arizona first and then wearing yourself out theoretically for an Arizona State team on Tuesday that typically upsets somebody every year, right? Um, then at some point you got to come back and play at Lubbock. That's a tough game as far as you're figuring out, okay, are we going to be able to navigate this conference with just 3 losses or something like that in conference play? You've already lost to Tech once. We know the whole debacle that went down in that game. You go to Lubbock in a way that I kind of think is the worst of all the worlds because Grant McCaslin, the head coach, and JT Toppin, their best player, probably feel wronged and like they need some revenge, but also you have to play at their place. Like, and they won the first time, so like the revenge is, even though they won, it's a bad like medley of things as far as mojo goes. Again, I think Houston can absolutely win that game. I think Houston brings their A game. Texas Tech brings their A game. Houston's better. Houston did not bring their A game the last time these two teams played. Not their best game, not their best showing. But honestly, Lubbock's a place where weird things happen. And so that's a tough one. You host Iowa State, which at least get them at home, but that is the only team that had a winning record against you in conference last year. They beat you in the conference championship game after splitting the regular season, the tournament conference championship game. And so, tough program, same coaching staff, a lot of the same players. Like that's going to be a tough one. Always is. I understand that they're 9-4 right now in conference. I'm not getting fooled by that. And then, frankly, you got to play Kansas at home, and I know you beat them up there in a way that kind of like might have helped spiral their season, but they're going to be looking for vengeance. They do have a lot of talented basketball players, even if they beat them up the first time in double overtime. That second overtime, Houston made it look like Kansas wanted to quit. I'm sure they're going to be trying to like overcome that narrative when they come to Houston. You got to go to Baylor, and as much as Houston just had fun with Baylor on Monday, Baylor's a lot better team at home. Like I don't know what to make of that either. Again, I imagine Houston at least gets to like 16-4, 17-3, and that I really think 17-3 wins the conference. Pretty sure 16-4 would as well. Beating Arizona on Saturday would get you a tiebreaker if you were both 16-4, right? Splitting with Tech would kind of make it go down to the second and third tiebreakers, and Houston's doing pretty well in those. So I think there's a real good path to get to win the conference, and I don't want to be negative Nancy. Acts like, oh, this is going to be so hard. I can't. Like realistically, I think Houston's got a good shot to win the conference, but this stretch is tough, and being number one team in the conference at the time of recording here means you got a target on your back as well. And so we'll see how all of that goes. I think more is going to change this weekend, though, and I really, really want to focus on that as we get ready for this game. But first, Park Ranger hosts a Locked On Coogs. You're talking about Houston and the movement that could be coming this weekend in college basketball. And what's kind of a crazy weekend as far as games and seedings and things like that go. Now, we talked about in the last segment, Houston, number one team in the Big 12, is going to Arizona for a tough matchup. The game is at 1 o'clock Central Time. That's number 6 team in the country versus number 13 team in the country. That gets the ESPN main channel treatment, which is nice. I don't think there'll be a Luka games coming in the middle of that one. But across the board, there are a lot of big-time games on Saturday this weekend, right? We're just going to go like hour by hour here as far as they got on ESPN, ESPN2. The first time slots, 11 a.m. Central Time. They got Arkansas at number 8, A&M, and Miami at Pitt. You can see either Miami or Pitt launch their way into the top 25. A&M at number 8, right? We mentioned that Houston, Arizona is at the 1 o'clock slot. The other 1 o'clock game on ESPN2 will be West Virginia and Baylor. You can see how that could navigate Big 12 changes. Obviously, big game of the day for ESPN is number 1 Auburn and number 2 Alabama. That game's at 3 o'clock. The other 3 o'clock game is Cincinnati at number 10 Iowa State. Again, Cincinnati's had decent games this year. 3 o'clock, the 5 o'clock hour, 5 o'clock Central Time hour, you got Mississippi State at Ole Miss. And then North Carolina fighting for their NCAA tournament lives is at Syracuse on the ESPN2 in that same window. The 7 o'clock window, and why these are all 2 hours apart, but the 7 o'clock window, you got number 15 Kentucky at Texas. I imagine Kentucky wins that one, but number 15 Kentucky at Texas, and then Troy at Arkansas State. Not the best window. 9 o'clock, 17 Kansas at Utah, Washington State at St. Mary's. You also have across the rest of the top 25, Wisconsin at Purdue is on CBS. I guess Purdue has lost this week, but Purdue's number 7 in America. Wisconsin's number 16, so that'll fluctuate some standings because one of those teams has to lose. Vanderbilt's at Tennessee, Texas Tech at Oklahoma State, Duke hosts Stanford after having just lost to Clemson. You got kind of a lot going. Army-Navy is always fun to watch, too, if you're into watching basketball. That's why you're listening to this. Michigan State, Illinois, Florida riding high, but they had to host South Carolina. And I could see any of these games being upset. So you got several games between ranked opponents, which someone has to lose. Like one of Auburn or Alabama will take a loss this weekend, depending on how much that loss is by, depending on how that game goes, what that game looks like. Frankly, even which of those two teams it is, that's going to shake up the top 5, right? One of those teams dropped to 6-7. I don't know. If they get blown out, maybe. And so looking at a lot of movement up there in the top of college basketball's rankings. It also stands to reason that's going to move net rankings. We've seen before, Houston had their first 2 wins in the Big 12, I believe, were against teams that were in the top points of the net, which would have been quad 1 wins, right? Like they were at West Virginia, but they beat them so bad that West Virginia went from like 72 to 76 or whatever it was in the net ranking, which ultimately made it not a quad 1 win anymore, right? And the way they decide that is if it's a quad 1 win at the end of the season, when all the data is calculated. So it's a constantly evolving thing here. But you're seeing a lot of movement potentially happen at the top of the college basketball after this weekend because of how many big games there are. I think Houston, Arizona is as big as it gets. I understand Auburn, Alabama is the rivalry aspect. They'll probably get game day there. Those teams play twice. Anyway, it's a little bit different to me. I think the rubber match for that, the second one will be a big deal there. They also, to me, are head and shoulders above the rest of the SEC. I know that Auburn just lost or whatever, and people are going to be having watched them play their best. I think those 2 teams are at the top, and everyone else is fighting for third. Now you can catch them on an off day. It's a bunch of 1-game samples. I get that. And I said, I think you're probably going to get 3 Auburn, Alabama games in basketball this year. I don't know how many Arizona, Houston games you're going to get. Right? The Big 12 is weird. The Big 12 is wonky. Teams knock each other off all the time. Houston's built to win 2 games in 3 days in March Madness. Houston's built to win Big 12 regular season games. Big 12 tournament, where you just got to win 4 games, 4 days in a row is not really what they're built to do. And so I don't know that Houston would play Arizona in a conference championship game in that one. We saw what happened to Houston last year, the conference tournament, right? And it just wasn't what they're built to do, right? And I say all that to say that because it might be the one time you see Houston, Arizona, the 2 top teams of the Big 12 play, I kind of feel like that's the bigger game. I'm obviously a little bit biased. I got Houston on my hat, Locked On Coogs on my shirt. I get that. But I just think that I'm going to get to see Auburn, Alabama at later points this year. And frankly, it might have other stakes tied to it, right? I feel like that's kind of that's what I feel about that one, right? And there are a lot of rivalry games listed across college sports this weekend. It's not quite rivalry week, but I could see how, as the Big 12 is evolving, if Houston can continue to have the kind of program they've had and continue to build on this program and develop this program, the shift from Kelvin to Kellen goes well, etc. How Houston and Arizona could be the two of the top teams in the Big 12. I still think, as I mentioned in the opening, that BYU is a sleeping giant. I still remember the good Cincinnati days and think that they can make a run at this thing at some point in the future. I don't understand how Central Florida's not better. You're in Orlando, tons of basketball talent in that part of the world, but they're not. I guess they gave us a close game this year. I shouldn't be too crazy, but anyway. All of that across the board is to say that there will be movement this weekend in the top 25. Houston at number 6 feels certain to get up into the top 5 if they beat the number 13 team in America. If they beat the number 13 team, I don't see anyone behind them getting in front of them. Whereas last week they won 2 games and dropped the spot. It's a weird sport. It's a weird way to calculate things. It's a weird calculus. But we're going to be following it. We're going to be tracking it each and every day here at Locked on Coogs. So if you want to talk about it as things come out and things happen over the week, you want to get in on the BYU AD search, or if you just don't believe me that impacts Houston, because I'm telling you it does. You can find me on social media at Painsworth512, Painsworth 512 on Twitter, Blue Sky, TikTok. I will say my Instagram is actually Painsworth Sports. We got a lot of fun stuff going on over there as well. Locked on Cougars is free and available wherever you get your podcast each and every day, talking all things Houston Cougars. For a second listen, talk a lot about the Big 12 today, I should say. Go check out Locked on Big 12. Locked on Cougs, the primary of the Locked on Podcast Network. That means your team every single day. Go Cougs.